Hey gang, welcome back for another episode of Ranching Reboot, your favorite regenerative ag podcast where we reboot your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. I'm your host, Red Hills Rancher. Last week's Spotify poll and Q&A results are in, and most of you seem to have changed your eating habits in the last 3 years. And I'm curious, why'd you change? Drop me an email and let me know. redhillsrancher@gmail.com. My good friends from the Noble Research Institute have invited me down to Stillwater, Oklahoma in a few weeks to take their Essentials of Regenerative Ranching 2-day intensive course. The Stillwater program is August 8th and 9th, but don't worry, if you can't make it to that one, there's 4 more schools late summer and into the fall. Click the Noble link in the description if you'd like to know more. I've also been invited back out to the Bottom Line Conference in Lake, Kansas, August 24th and 25th. If you've never been to the Bottom Line Conference, it's a great little meeting out in the heart of the plains, and there's a really awesome community of producers that are genuinely trying to change the way they farm the land. In the past, they've had speakers like Dallas Mount from Ranching for Profit and Mary Jo Ehrman from Farming Without the Bank. This year, they've got Steve Campbell lined up for a couple of breakout sessions and a keynote. I'm excited to go back to Lakin again and see all my friends and maybe even some of you. You can find out more information and a full agenda at bottomlineconference.org or click the link in the description. And I might be saying some more about it in a future episode too. This episode is sponsored by Bobo Links. Bobo Links are an all-natural beef snack from the fine folks at Blue Nest Beef. I love them and I usually have one in my pocket to keep my body fueled during long days at the ranch. They're perfect for snacking on the go. Individually wrapped, Bobo Links have amazing flavor that mostly comes from the natural fermentation process. That's right, no nitrates at all in Bobo Links. If you're looking for a healthy snack that won't slow you down, try Bobo Links by clicking the link in the description. And don't forget to use the code Bobo Reboot for $10 off your first pack. That's like half off. Try some today. Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Got a little bit more salt in that beard than the last time I saw you.
I know it. That's I don't know if that's wisdom or what's coming out, but
Let's call it wisdom. Let's just stick with wisdom. How long have you had that thing on your face? I think we were just discussing it the other day, and I've had mine since October 2012, I think.
yeah, no, that's a good question. I hadn't really thought back on it. I would say full beard, probably, oh man, uh 2000 or somewhere in there. So
You definitely got me beat then, sir.
yeah, 20 years probably. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Chin's probably really, really light colored under that thing.
Yeah.
So, well, welcome to Ranching Reboot, Chad. And so you're with Texas Agricultural Land Trust now?
That is correct.
Tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about that. I guess I don't know anything about that. We've got quite a few listeners down in Texas.
Yeah. No, Brian, I mean, good. Thanks again for inviting me, and always good to catch up. And kind of as you said in the beginning, I mean, probably the first time we met, my beard was probably reddish at that time, and now
It
a
was
little
very dark.
yeah. But no, Texas Agricultural Land Trust, we're an organization built by producers for producers. We're a little over 15 years old now, Brian. Kind of we were set up by a bunch of ranchers that just looking at what was coming down the pipeline, and we needed an organization, a trusted source to to help build more tools in the toolbox to help empower, our fellow producers to keep that legacy and heritage together, right, into the next generation. And so the Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, Texas Farm Bureau, and Texas Wildlife Association, those three organizations came together. And here in Texas, Brian, those three are our biggest grassroots land owner organizations. So they stood up tall. And we fast forward today, we have 5 board members from each one of those organizations that represent, on our board made up of producers. So, our big focus, I would say bread and butter, is conservation easements as that tool. But one of the things that we're always looking for, Brian, is, what are all other alternatives? What are other ecosystem service markets being carbon, water, biodiversity, just thinking outside the box, and how do we layer and stack these opportunities to help our fellow landowners.
You open up a few little cans of worms there that we can go chase a little bit later.
Yeah.
Like carbon and conservation easements.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you, Chad.
Yeah.
Now, see, I think I met you probably all the way back in 06 or 07, something like that. And you were still working for Noble at the time.
Right.
So
right.
Tell me where you're from and how you got to Noble. Like,
Yeah.
where'd you grow up and get a passion for agriculture?
Sure.
And
No, it's a great question. No, it's a great question. So if you look on a map of Texas and you put a pin right in the dead center, it's where I grew up. A little bitty town called Lone. So it's a very, very much, Brian, a small ranching farming community. And I graduated the big class of 4.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was the top 25% of the class.
Well, congratulations.
So, I mean, we had, 85 students K through 12, right? So that ranching farming is, kind of in the DNA, right? And those land stewards is just kind of where I grew up and what's important to me. And you start looking across the landscape of, seeing, elders and stuff that were mentors that meant so much to you growing up or have passed away, and just seeing those lands change, right? And those opportunities. And so it's always been in me to, how can I help, our fellow landowners. So I graduated high school, went to Sul Ross State University in kind of far west Texas in Alpine, got a degree in wildlife management, natural resource management. Actually started working as a wildlife biologist a little bit coming out of or as my undergrad, and quickly kind of hit reality, Brian, and you'll appreciate this, is just kind of working with a lot of wildlife biologists and just the way they looked at things. They were really understood the critter, but didn't understand the habitat and the management, right? In that side.
Is that because you took more of a wildlife and natural resources approach than an animal science and animal production type approach?
Yeah, so I think, that's where I think a lot of biologists' background is, right? Is exactly that point. And so, and I think backgrounds, right, of where people come from and, raised up, and so just understanding the whole system. And so that's what really happened to me, Brian, is just your point. I kind of quickly is like, I need to go back and get my master's. And I got my master's in animal science, range management, and that combination, because I wanted to better be rounded and understand how do you really manage these dynamic ecosystems and from all angles. And so got my master's there at Angelo State, and finished up there and actually started working for Natural Resource Conservation Service as a range conservationist, and worked out of San Angelo and those kind of surrounding counties there, and kind of followed the NRCS path as a district conservationist in South Texas, and went back to Alpine as a team resource leader, kind of a supervisor out in far west Texas. And one of the paths that I think is very fortunate for staff within RCS is you have different paths of, working with landowners in those field offices, or there's kind of the science path. And I was kind of at that point that I really wanted to kind of get back into the science side. And I actually took a position as the state range conservationist in Florida. Right, went from the Chihuahuan Desert to Florida in July, and went from
That's a
nine.
different kind of miserable heat.
It's a different place, right? And so I that was the best move my whole career, Brian. I mean, hands down. I thought I was a pretty strong and pretty good range conservationist and understood range management and all of those things, and I did. And then you go to a different climate and just everything. And, in Florida, 1 inch elevation is a different plant community, right? And it's just kind of putting all of those principles and everything that you've learned in other ecosystems and put it in place, and with some great challenges and great opportunities. I think one of the other benefits of just not only that side, Brian, was the understanding of working with people and engagement, and how do we bring people along. And one of the challenges that's really unique, I think, in the Florida challenge is University of Florida is the ag based school there in Florida. They had a range program, and you could get a range science degree at University of Florida. They cut that program in 1985.
Really? It's strange because Florida actually has a lot of cattle in it, and not a lot of people know that.
Yeah, no, and that was one of the things that really drew me to Florida. I mean, it's the 7 of the top 15 cattle producers in the nation in Florida, right? I mean, it's big operations. I learned so much from those guys because their operations are not just cattle; they're all diversified operations of citrus, turf. I mean, they have lots of different enterprises, and they just the way they look at it. But one of those challenges kind of coming back is that range program cutting out or ending in 1985. So you think about, all of our ranchers, all of our NRCS field staff, extension, their really only option was animal science, was their ag degree. And so, they didn't have a whole lot of natural resources and grazing management and these other aspects that we need to be all well-rounded in all of those aspects. And so it really laid some challenges, of just trying to really having to start from ground zero on a lot of areas and bring people along. So I really enjoyed my time in Florida for many, many reasons. And then from Florida, I moved back to Texas at Fort Worth at the Regional Technology Support Center.
Still for NRCS?
Still for NRCS. And I was a Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative Coordinator. And that time, Brian,
that's right. I forgot you
and
were
that's
one
probably
of the kingpins to start Texas Grazing Lands.
Yeah. So that's where some of it probably, I think you and I met, if, maybe once during that period. But that's kind of really when I met your dad and so many others in Kansas. And Kansas was one of my main states that was under my responsibility of helping the coalition there. So that was, many, many years ago. And then kind of fast forward to that transition was my transition to Noble. And that's a whole nother story in itself, Brian, is to me, that position I mentioned at NRCS was probably the best position in the whole agency. But I was flying to some other state, helping, somewhere every week. And I parked at a remote parking spot south of DFW Airport. And lady came out of the booth one morning and came out with the newspaper and a bottle of water. And, hey, Mr. Ellis, how are you doing this morning? Here's your paper, water, go park on, aisle in. and got back into the booth, and the arm goes up, and I start driving, to the aisle she mentioned, and it was just aha moment. And I was like, man, how in the world does this lady know my name?
You're there way too much if the parking
Yep,
attendant knows your name.
yep. And so it just sort of this reality hit, right? And it was kind of this aspect of, I see this lady more than my wife and kids, and uh, job is great. I'm loving helping other folks across the country, but I really need, I really started trying to assess life, right, and what's important in life, and those things. And so at that point, position came open at Noble as a range conservation, or range consultant, range and pasture consultant. And I was like, this is a great way to get back working, one-on-one with landowners, because I'd been away from, got to do some of that, but was more helping, other consultants and field staff and things of that nature, and building technologies and things. And so I put in for that position, started working with Noble, and ended up making that transition to Noble, which was a great, right? I get to back, um, went there to think, hey, I'm not going to travel as much. I'm going to be right there. And, at that time, it didn't happen that way. I think one of the fun things about it was right at that time when I went to Noble. Bill Buckner, the past CEO of Noble, had been there maybe 4 months or 6 months before I got there. And, I was talking to Hugh Aljo and back and forth. And he's like, hey, let me send you this DVD of our new CEO. And he addressed them, the staff, of the direction he wants to take the organization. And I watched that DVD, and it was, Brian, it was just amazing. It was so empowering to me, because it was the first time I'd ever heard anybody articulate really where they wanted to fully take an organization that met my internal mission and vision,
Okay.
right?
When,
Of
when was this, Chad?
This would have been in 2012,
Okay.
about, yeah, about 10, 11, 12 years ago. Um, 2011, probably somewhere in there.
It's really
Uh,
weird to think that that was 12 years ago, but go
yeah, yeah. So, visiting, so that was just a great, and I was like sold. I'm like, this is once in a lifetime. Um, I'm all in. And so we made that move, and quickly I kind of moved to a different role as where we needed as an organization. Of still got to do a little bit of consulting, but never really got to do what I thought I was going there, originally. Just really helped with Bill thinking, what are new things that we can build, right, to help landowners put soil health on the ground, regenerative agriculture, those pieces. And so really helped in a lot of the formation of the Soil Health Institute, the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium. Really built a great team. I mean, and a lot of my old team, which are really dear friends of Jeff Goodwin and Mariah Johnson, and we sort of built this awesome team that really looked at the issues we face, right, through an economics lens, through just the ecosystem function, and how do we do that? How do we put all this together in a business, and stay profitable, and at the same time, enhancing our ecosystem, and the long term sustainability of us. So it was a really great time. Probably some of the best times of my career, for sure.
Very cool. I kind of remember, it was around that, 2011, 12 time period. Before that, Noble was kind of like restricted about 90 miles outside of Ardmore.
Right,
Like it was
right.
it was difficult to get you guys to come up here to Kansas to really help, because there for a while you're like, sorry, you're a little far away. We'll get there if we can, but it's not on our priority list. But then that, like you said, that changed.
Yeah,
That changed in like 11 and 12, and you know the profile of Noble just started to really rise then, because you guys are getting out to other states and other conferences and other meetings and letting people know what you had to offer. And I thought that was really great.
Yeah, it was a great time, and that was a big push of mine, and it made sense, I think, for some of the the reasoning, right, from an organizational structure. Noble's very unique and a true blessing, um, providing that guidance and assistance and things. How they looked at it from a board perspective was, where could we help with put the best resources, and I think it's just like anyone, we sometimes overcompensate or put in a box, and that's where that 90-mile radius came about. Was, hey, if we can go from 90 miles, it's an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. We could work with the landowner, on their place and be able to drive back home. And that's how, it was kind of analyzed. I think, even before that, I think they had a little bit more free ranging of being able to go, and that's where it kind of sucked down to that 90. And now you look at it, some of that start was in that 2012 period, where we were able to kind of start breaking and showing those impacts of how we're helping folks beyond that. And that's really when you and I got to kind of start working together. And yeah, it's great.
Okay. So now tell me about your move to Texas Ag Land Trust,
Yeah.
or your last couple of years at Noble. I mean, wherever you
Yeah.
want to start.
Yeah. No, I mean, so Noble was great. I think what happened, and really, it's kind of, you just don't know where life takes you, I guess. And I think for my wife and I, definitely thought Noble was kind of our last move, right? We would definitely retire there, uh, and probably would still be there. I think what kind of happened is kind of through those working relationships and partnerships, at Noble. I worked with Texas Ag Land Trust on different projects and things over the years, and knew Blair Fitzsimmons, who was the founding CEO of TALT, and many of the board members with Bob McCann and Roel Lopez with Texas A&M and M and others, had that relationship. And um, Blair came to that step of, became a grandmother and had the first grandchild, and had that aha moment herself of, hey, I think I'm going to try this retirement thing and be a grandmother and enjoy that side, and not, wake up too late in life. And I think it caught her off guard as well. I think as quickly as that move and the opportunity came up for me, and it and it came sooner than I expected. I think, Brian, is kind of one of those things that just lined out. It puts me, I'm about 2 hours away from my home place. And, my folks are well in their 80s. And so that was a big factor, right? It got me closer to home to be able to help and do things and be there for them, instead of, 4.5, 5 hours away from Ardmore. And so we just made the jump. Um, I will say, and something I don't recommend by any means, I took the position right before COVID and actually made the transition during COVID. So I don't ever recommend taking over an organization during a pandemic. Just by the way, uh, it's got its own challenges.
Probably couldn't have seen that one coming.
So, but no, it's been great. And you fast forward today, where we are at TALT and helping folks. When I came to TALT, we had around 6 or 7 projects in the pipeline, right? And what I mean by projects, of families that we were working with on a conservation easement, sort of in our pipeline. And you fast forward today, and we're over 90 in our pipeline in just 3 years, a little over 3 years.
Very
So
cool.
the and for conservation easements and looking at that and being that need is has grown tremendous. Um, and it's been fun trying to help them and find new ways and put things in place where we can help empower them.
Okay. So, for those of us that just explain it in simple terms, what a conservation easement is and isn't.
Sure. Yeah. So a conservation easement is an agreement with a land or easement holder like Texas Ag Land Trust. Will hold um, like a bundle of rights, right? And so we're holding really the development rights. Um, so for essence and simple terms, I guess Brian is um, we're given the opportunity holding the development rights off of off of a ranch or farm. That rancher or farmer still gets to keep farming and ranching, and you get the asset of either the donation value or a purchase value of that bundle of right of that development right. And so what it does is it helps empower those families of either from a tax or inheritance aspect of estate planning. It gives them a tool from that perspective. And then the other side is we think of a lot of situations. I mean, we think of my situation or your situation, Brian, of where you could put a conservation easement, have a purchase where someone outside is purchasing that easement. We think of a lot of landowners, right, are land rich, cash poor, and it's hard, right, in those transitions. And I think of those days of your father Ted and you transitioning, of you taking over the operation. You know what? That's one option. Is right is an easement. You get that purchased. You could build a operational endowment or help. One generation help with a little bit of liquidity out of that operation. Have a retirement. Still have those assets in that transition for the next generation to take over. So there's lots of that's the thing that I love about a conservation easement. They all look different, from Talt's perspective. They all look different. There's not one that looks the same because we're meeting the goals and objectives of that landowner and we develop it, for them. Um, I think the one thing I will say is that, just kind of like we can get in on the wheats and carbon markets, right? They're not all the same,
Oh,
right?
we'll get to carbon
Yeah.
markets.
They're not all the same. And so that's the thing is like, um, it's understanding, the first most important piece is finding the land trust that really fits you and understands you, right? Perpetual is a damn long time. So you better have that trust and understanding of that land trust. And so, that's the piece, that's the beauty. I mean, we have a key guiding principles at Talt of, we want to keep the freedom to operate. So we'll never dictate we'll never put what you can and can't do on your operation. Um, Really, what I like to call it, we're really about, open space, really is how it's set up. It's keeping that open space, is that ecosystem service for society to see, no more buildings and things of that nature. But you still have the ability and ways to put in that easement of future, house or cabins and things of that. So you still can build from that. It just can't be a Walmart casino or, a neighborhood type of thing.
Right. So I've never really seriously considered one. I've
Sure.
never really thought about one. My dad's he can be kind of negative about them sometimes. And
Yeah.
okay, that's fair. Because there are some of them, like some of the early
Yep.
conservation easements that were thrown around. You couldn't go move a fence. You couldn't build another foot of
Yep.
electric fence. You couldn't put other water tanks in the ground. You couldn't build a new building at your headquarters. And those seem like overly restrictive to me. Um, and when you like the concept of selling off specific types of development rights, and I guess we're kind of dancing around it. Like these conservation easements can be very specific, or they can be fairly broad. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they can be like 100% tailored for the operation. It's not like I'll just call somebody out, Nature Conservancy. It's not like they've got a one size fits all conservation easement that they're trying to push. Maybe they do. I don't know. But it's not a one size fits all approach. It's got to be a customized approach for what fits the needs of that operation. And in some extent, here in Kansas, we have severed minerals. So you can have
Mhm.
one surface owner owning the surface and another owner
Correct.
owning the
Yep.
minerals, and that can
Same
be
same here in Texas.
okay. So this is just kind of like it's kind of like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to look at it. Yes. I kind of back up. I mean, it's kind of like I mentioned, not all conservation easements are the same, right? And some of those land trusts are very restrictive in the way they write them and develop them, right? To your dad's point of not, being reluctant, of not being a good fit, right? So that tool's probably not the right one. Um, and so we can tailor them and do tailor them. One of the key pieces, right, of TALT's guiding principles is we won't get into putting those management perspectives, right? So we want to keep that freedom to operate. So you don't ever have to call us and say, "Hey, I'm putting in a fence, or I'm moving a fence, or I need to put a water line here to put a water trough," right? Because that's your operation. That's what you're doing on a daily basis. That's not our business, and we don't need to tell you. You don't have to. I mean, we have a lot of landowners, you know, do call us just saying, just to cover, and we're like, "Hey, that's great. You need help, and we'll help you, or whatever, from that end." But you do have other land trusts that are. So those are the things you just have to really kind of think through, and again, who's that right partner? Who's going to be able to work with you? And that's what I look at it, right? Is that it is a partnership. It's a family, right? We've helped 45 families, um, put conservation easements to help their goals and objectives, Brian. But I look at them as the Talt family as a generals too, right? So we're going to be partnering forever, and trying to help them. And so that's the exciting part. And I think from a landowner's perspective is it's nice to know that you have someone else there fighting for you, right? I think that's a lot of times, and you and I've talked about this for different things over the years, where sometimes you just feel like you're alone fighting for whatever may happen. Maybe it's a power line or pipeline coming through and it's eminent domain type of situation, or something wild, whatever it may be. Those are going to be areas where you have a partner with you.
Okay.
That makes Yeah.
And I could see how, having a conservation easement in places could help. Like I'm thinking of
Yeah.
Paul and Gabe Brown, what they're dealing with up in North Dakota. Like there's a company that wants to build a 2 foot diameter pipeline to move liquid carbon dioxide across their ranch. And they're having all sorts of problems because, the company's trying to say, well, if you don't want to work with us, we'll just eminent domain you.
Right.
You got to give us an easement to where we can put this pipeline anywhere we want on your property, and you can't say anything about it. We got to come back whenever we want, and you
Mhm.
can't tell us what to do. And there's a big difference between negotiating with a local power company on where they want to put a power line and drive across the pasture, and
Yeah.
dealing with a company that's got federal backing across state lines, that's probably got, some of those people making the laws are heavily invested in the company.
Yeah.
And it just seems like there's not a whole lot of folks looking out for the little guy anymore.
Yeah. No, those are great points. I mean, one of the pieces and one of our kind of advocacy points at TALT, from a state level, Brian, is trying, let me kind of back up, conservation easement in Texas doesn't hinder eminent domain, right? It doesn't stop it. It does. And that's where we're trying to get language, and state policy to add that, more assurance, right? When we think about the conservation values of that property and the values to society, to kind of help, at least be, at last resort type language, where those pipelines can only go through from last resort, and be that. So, that's the piece, is that we can help and be part of that situation. There's areas where, like, if you go from a purchased conservation easement where maybe NRCS, or someone like that is paying for that, conservation value of that. A lot of times when we have the federal and things of that nature, it does help, or some state funding sometimes Some states have language, and again, every state's a little different in laws and regulations, but will help from that eminent domain as well. So there are advantages in a lot of those cases. But again, even if we don't have that, just having some extra, source and help by you to help mitigate those bulldozing, as you said, in multiple ways can definitely help. So that's what I like about the easements, right? It's another tool. It's not the right tool for every family or every situation and every time. And that's what I want to make clear. It's not a one size fits all and everybody should have it, right? It's definitely operation to operation, family to family, and the timing of it definitely helps.
Yeah, I'm hung up on you said farmers and ranchers can use these to can use these conservation easements as tools. And I get the overall big picture goals of a conservation easement. And I start wondering, like, are we talking like pecan farmers, or are we talking, 10,000 acre soybean and corn farms? Because it doesn't seem like there'd be a whole lot of conservation easement on a monocrop commodity field. It it
Yeah,
it seems like, okay, we're going to pay you to keep this permanently destroyed and keep it in this production system.
right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I always say is the even if we take our worst monoculture, I mean, whatever the scenario may be, would you rather that be a pavement, and what value ecosystem service values is pavement providing, or you know,
I
it
mean,
could,
I could almost make an argument for pavement over monocrop, but I totally get
yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
if the choice is pave it over and put a Walmart or a Dollar General there, or let it be corn and soybeans, let's let it be corn and soybeans.
yeah.
Fine, because we don't need more Dollar Generals in the world.
Well, and I think too, right, is that we're also looking at some of those operations, right, as today and a snapshot of today, and maybe in the past, but there's still the aspect of the future of a monoculture, right? That family, that decision may change to something else, right? And then start improving, and we find other incentives to improve. So I think that's one of the ways to look at it is, what can we provide today to get us to this point, and then what else can we keep providing to make positive change in those systems.
Have you had anybody that's signed a conservation easement come back a year or two or three later or more and need a clarification or need a tweak or want to change?
Yeah, so we haven't had any major changes or anything of that nature. We have had I guess we've worked on one amendment, which was a change this last year where they actually added some more acreage onto a current easement that they had. So we just sort of amended that easement and added some acres that they had, some additional acres that they wanted to add into that conservation easement. One of the things too is we try to build them with the flexibility, right? Not be, as you mentioned, so specific. So that I think helps in some of those, projects as we move forward. And then the other piece, Brian, that I can't stress enough is that it's not finished, right? As we close that conservation easement, talk's not part of it. One of the components is we have a monitoring requirement from the IRS to come out and do a site visit, make sure the Walmarts and whatnot is not developed. And through those, it's just good conversations of, man, how's everything going? Where's this? Where's your operation going? What are you thinking about doing next? And understanding that, and then also helping to start meeting and understanding and building that relationship with the next generation. And so those things really help us where it mitigates a lot of the oh shit moments, if you want to look at it that way, and we're just kind of work through those as we go. Those will happen. I mean, there's no doubt that we don't know what's ahead of us, 75 years from now, or 100 years, or 50, or and we'll work through those amendments and those changes as we need with those landowners.
I don't. I just had the thought that it's been a while since we've had major breakthroughs that have really advanced animal husbandry and grazing of livestock. It's like everything that we think we're discovering or learning that's new, somebody knew that hundreds of years ago and probably wrote a book about it. Every time we think we've discovered something novel about stockmanship, it turns out there's a tribe in Africa that's been doing it forever. Like we're not inventing it. It doesn't seem like we're inventing anything new anymore. We're just finding better old ways to do the new stuff.
I think it's well said. Well said.
So I wanted to, you mentioned the word stewardship several times earlier, and the context you mentioned it in. I wanted to clarify. What do you mean when you say good stewardship?
Yeah, I think land stewardship, right? I mean, that's looking at the whole system, right? From our soils, our plants, our animals, and trying to improve those, and a systems and a holistic approach, right? Not trying to take one component and maximize one piece and let the rest of it fall. And I think that's exciting. I think on many points, right? And I think we think of a land stewardship too. Is it's you start thinking of some of the writings of Aldo Leopold, right, around land stewardship, and that's kind of where I look at it and fall too. And those were written 80 plus years ago, and they weren't necessarily novel just from him, as your point. There's other writings even way before that talk about these things. But we seem to always, that's history shows us we always want to try to think that we can improve things better and do things, outside the norm, and we're slow learners, I think.
Short-term memory.
Short-term memory. Most definitely.
All right. You ready to talk about carbon?
Let's do it.
I think that grass-fed beef will be a byproduct of the carbon sequestration industry.
Mm-hmm. I think things, when we look at how things are moving, right, Brian, and these kind of insetting or scope 3 kind of, I hate to get way too in the weeds, but
we're already in the weeds.
Yeah, in this process of within the value chain, right, of corporations and in the food sector, I think we'll kind of move into, and opportunities, as you mentioned, into that space. I think when we think about carbon, and it's not just, I throw other things too. We think about ecosystem services as a whole, and the ecosystem process, right? And the functionality of ecosystems, it's very, very complex, right? And I think at times, again, the short-term memory and the paralysis of us is trying to make things better. We make things more complicated.
I was just thinking about, like, there's a graphic that I've seen several times about how much oxygen the Corn Belt produces in June and July. How much CO2 that it pulls down. And I have this, I kind of have this memory of this, like, really a map of the US, and there's this big green blob kind of over the ice states. I'm like, and I think, okay, that's great. That's great that we're, that there's that much plant respiration taking place. What about the other 8 months of the year where that ground is bare?
Right.
I mean, Most of it probably is. What do we do in the other 8 months of the ground while it's bare? Let's talk about the whole year long cycle in that field rather than just looking at it for a couple of months and saying, oh, look how good it is for right now. When 6 months later, it's bare soil and we're piling up cars on the interstate because the dust is so bad. It, big picture, holistic. And it's got to be seen on more than just a 1 year time scale to really make sense. And us as humans, we're flawed. Like our temporal sense is just all messed up.
Yeah.
Some people can't even tell you, what 5 minutes looks like or what happened last year, what they had for breakfast yesterday. But as land managers, we've got to be in tune with the rhythms and the yearly and seasonal pulses of the land. It's difficult to me, when I hear companies like primarily based up in the I states talking about carbon, like, oh, we're going to sell you carbon storage on our cornfields. No, you're not. Because as soon as you till that up, it's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, your carbon, yeah, okay, 2 tons an acre carbon storage in Iowa. Big deal. You till it up in the fall and it all goes back to the atmosphere. So let's talk about the whole year long cycle instead of just one little tiny, tiny bit.
No, I think those are all great points. And I think one of the great points, right? And I think one of the things that, and it doesn't take us long or many years, or, to think back where 100% of those conversations were strictly on farming, right? In those farm operations. And, the grazing operations weren't even, I mean, we weren't even brought up as a solution or even part of, or even if we weren't a solution, to even think about, well, what else can it provide?
We've always
And
been a fringe minority anyway.
yeah, yeah. And so it's nice to finally um, be able to be part of that and be able to say, look, right, we are providing, a living root in there 365 days. And all of the benefits of, just opposite of what you're saying, and all the great things. And it's I've never seen it like this before. I mean, really, where we are today, we're still not where we need to be in these conversations, and even highlights of the importance of our grazing lands to the security of our nation. But I think people are starting to be enlightened and learning a little bit more, and we have to put it in another gear and get the information out there.
It's it's an uphill battle though, I think.
Yeah.
There was I think it was on TikTok last night. I saw a video and kind of went through how McDonald's is pretty much one of the largest single buyers of beef
Mhm.
in the country, maybe even in the world. And the same goes for, the buns, the pickles, the lettuce, the tomatoes, and
Right.
the onions, right? They want it all to taste the same everywhere. And when you have that much purchasing power, you get what you want. And the rest of the market gets to follow your lead. And, like, we can talk about grass fed beef. We can talk about saving the world with local food. It's going to be a long time before that gets the double digit percentages.
Right.
Before, the big multinational food companies, the big multinational packers, before they're going to start feeling a sting, we've got a very long road. But I think it starts with everybody. It has to start at home with a small change in the eating habit. And people say, oh, those, grassroots efforts never work. Yeah, they do. They just take a lot longer and you don't see them working overnight. If you want something to work right now, you need top down management that doesn't care. If you want something to work for a long period of time, that decision needs to come from the ground up and be supported by the people on the ground. And by the time the people at the top are kind of aware there's a change, there's way too much support on the ground level for those at the top to ignore it. And what I'm saying is, consumers were at the bottom. And your purchasing dollar has power, whether you believe it or not. And every time somebody makes a choice to drive past McDonald's and go to the local burger joint, that's a positive choice on your community. It, it's also a positive choice to go buy from a local rancher and
Yeah.
go buy your onions and tomatoes from local farmers. And I get that's not possible all year, but when it's possible, I think people should be doing it. And we're not going to take away McDonald's profits. It's not going to happen. But over a long enough period of time, these big companies are smart enough. They'll see the pattern. They'll see the pattern. They'll see where the consumer dollars are flowing, and they'll want to get in on it. It's only a matter of time. And I think we have to keep fighting the fight on the ground and talking about what's wrong with the food system, talking about what's wrong with their land management, and getting more people aware about where their food comes from and getting people to make a more educated choice about where their food comes from. I mean, I think you've heard me say it once or twice, something like shake the hand that feeds you.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. I mean, I think, and I think, I think it comes back to that human aspect. We want instantaneous, no matter where we are of satisfaction or whatever. And I think, I mean, the grassroots can work and will work, right? We just have to stay hold to it and not get frustrated and move on to the next way, right? And not follow into that side. But and I think too, there's this other dynamic too, Brian, as we kind of look at a holistically across the landscape, right? And we look at a few things. I think one that concerns me, and then I think there's some positives in this too. Kind of bear with me as I kind of lay this out. One of the things, the issues here in Texas, right? And I'll just use Texas, and Texas isn't the only issue. It's even, in your home state as well. But we're losing almost 1,000 acres a day to development of working lands, right? 1,000 acres a day, 365,000 acres a year. We're gaining 1,400 people moving to Texas daily, right? So we start thinking of that population increase and things.
How many acres did you say you're losing?
It's pushing 1,000 acres
a day,
right?
Wow.
It's astonishing, right? And that's where it comes back.
That's just the houses.
Yeah, that's just houses. Yeah, exactly.
If you throw in invasive trees, do you know how many acres?
I don't want to know the number. I have a hard enough time understanding this 1,000 acres, Brian.
I just brought that up because the figure, because Oklahoma loves to keep track of that. And I think they're up to like 810 acres a year to invasive trees.
Yeah. No, so these are these challenges, right? And these dilemmas and these aspects, right? And so, in Texas, pushing 1,000 acres, we're gaining 1,400 people daily, moving to the state daily, right? So you just have this nexus, and how do we come to this? But at the same time, what we're seeing, right, is we're seeing a lot of these, I would say, new landowners that are buying property for the first time. They're kind of new to the landowners, right? They grew up in a farming, ranching, or they grew up in a city and maybe multi-generation aspects away from the farm or ranch. And what they're able to do, Brian, is be able to look at this opportunity of buying property, but their education and understanding how to manage that property is at a new, they're at a beginning stage. And so that makes it tough, right? When we start thinking of all of our, grassroots of education and helping them, we got to start from kind of ground zero. And that's not a bad thing, because there's less paradigm shifts and things that we have to break through of, that other side of multi-generation, right? Of this, how dad did it, grandfather did it, and that side. And then what we're also seeing, Brian, is a lot of what I call back to the land type landowner, right? Is someone that, grew up in a rural, maybe, had a career, they're retiring and coming back home. And again, just trying to help them. So I think we have to keep that in mind too. Back to your point, as we kind of start moving this, forward in these systems and this land stewardship and things of that nature of, how we got to meet people where they are and help them kind of go through this journey of being better tomorrow than they are today.
A lot to unpack there. There's the coastal exodus happening. You said 14,000 every day from California.
1,400 people moving.
1,400.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like my county every 2 days.
Yeah. No, exactly. And so, and everybody comes from different backgrounds or understanding and, which is all great, right? But there's a lot to get everybody kind of on the same page to move forward.
It's a culture thing. And, when that many people come, I guess it's a percentage thing. When you have a large influx of new people to an area, it can't help but shift the culture, like in the short term and in the long term. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think maybe there's some Californians that could see. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's not all bad, right? There's good into it all, right? And it's just getting to a common ground and understanding, and I think what happens, right, is and we see this further and further disconnected to agriculture and land stewardship, right? And in my mind, right, just because it's generations that may not understand fully where their food comes from. Back to your point, right? And how do we? And this is part of. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? And we're kind of coming back to this point of how do we educate? Who do we educating to? Some of the things that we're working towards hard with at Talt, Brian, is kind of telling the story differently, right? And trying to really talk about the outcomes and the benefits that these land stewards are providing to the public, right? It's the public benefits. And so, like, kind of stay with me here for a second. And, we have helped 43 families, empowered those families of putting conservation easements on 200 and roughly about 280,000 acres, right, across the state. So from the Panhandle to, far west Texas, South Texas, East Texas, et cetera, right, all over, kind of scattered across the state, kind of 280,000 acres. And I kind of say that those times we used to, I would say, used to tout how many acres we had under easement, right? And to me, those days are done, right? We have to talk about what's the impact of those acres providing, right? And so if we take those, roughly 45 families, those land stewards, on a yearly basis, how many water bottles do you think from their conservation and land stewardship could they fill in a year? Just your traditional water bottle. Any idea?
Probably a lot.
A lot. Yeah, that's a good number. Take a guess. Take a wild guess, Brian. You're smart.
It's got to be in the millions, because we're talking, like, if we're talking water, an acre foot is 325,000 gallons.
Yep.
If we're just talking, a foot of rain on 1 acre, that's a couple truckloads of bottles of water.
Yeah. So it's 550 billion water bottles.
Okay. I wasn't even going to take a step at that math.
Yeah. So 550 billion, right? And so, like, that's a thing where, having this conversation and educating to understand what you're doing on your place and the benefit, right, of just that, the land stewardship and the good grazing practices and things you are providing, of just clean water and water quality and quantity that you're providing, right, to the community as a whole, people beyond the fence line, right, as I always kind of talk about it. And so that's a way that we can get this aspect of them understanding that, having Brian Alexander out there grazing uh, maybe provides more benefits than another Walmart or another Dollar General, like you mentioned, right? And it's just trying to understand and connect them to something that they may use on a daily basis. And that's just one example that we try to really hone into, to bring science and understanding and kind of bridge this consumers and folks that are further disconnected of the importance of our land stewardship across the state.
Okay. Is there a minimum size that a minimum acreage that you'd be interested in doing an easement
Yeah,
on? And
yeah,
what's the process like if somebody wanted to explore conservation easement in Texas?
yeah. No, great question. So we usually say, and it's a gray area, Brian, around 140 acres is kind of minimal. And that's just the economic side, is just the economics to make it work, and the benefits there is usually there. But we do hold easements that are smaller than that, 60, 80 acres. So it all depends. Our process, Brian, how that's set up, and kind of like I mentioned, we're, um, organization made up of producers themselves on the board. So we'll take an application from someone that's interested. In that application, we develop a memo of kind of understanding their goals and objective, where the property is, the layout, et cetera. And then that goes to our land committee made up of our board members who are landowners. And it's sort of that gut check to make sure that it's meeting still our mission and vision as a nonprofit. And they kind of give us that final green light to move forward. So the process is that in Texas, anybody can call or reach us at Texas Ag Land Trust, and we'll help them and kind of have these discussions as you and I are having, kind of understand, what's motivating them, understand the benefits. We'll a lot of times come out to their property and just meet them face to face to have those conversations and let them know, send them information packets and kind of walk through these things. The thing is, right, a conservation easement is a real estate transaction, right? Because there's that aspect of that severed right, just as you mentioned of oil and gas. There's a severed right of kind of the development that's sitting there. And with it being a real estate transaction, there's expenses to them, just as you would sell your house, right? You got surveys and policy work and closing costs and all of these type of things, right? And so they're not cheap to do, and that's where we work and try to find funding and work with others to help pay for those due diligence costs as we can, and those options with landowners. So we kind of walk through all of those pieces with them. The interesting thing, Brian, and you ask of, what's the time, how long does it take us to close an easement, maybe a part of the question, right? And, by the time someone calls us and we start working with them and kind of laying out the options and them to fully understand the conservation easement, and them kind of work through the process, of understanding, where do they want building envelopes? Do they want partitions? Do they want to be able to divide the ranch in the future? All of those things we kind of work with them, and there's a lot of that thinking process that you haven't thought of. And usually by the time we have that first engagement to the time we close is probably 2.5 years, on average. I mean, some we have the conversation and we close within 6 or 8 months, depending if it's a donated easement. But you start adding layers of purchased easements, right? There's another party that's paying. They're going to want certain things, and so it's just the process. And so I always kind of tell people, it's better to have the conversation sooner than later, to to get you to kind of start thinking, is it the right thing or not, and understand the tool and its capabilities fully. And more importantly, right? And I think I know you believe the same thing, is find other landowners that have conservation easements. And that's the other thing we can do is, send you to other, other producers that have conservation easements, and talk to them and hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And we don't have to be in the conversation, friends of our, mutual friends that we hold the easement on is Emery Birdwell and Deborah Clark. Great. I mean, couldn't ask for two better people, and they're a great resource to visit with and ask, why did they do it? Well, what did they like? What did they not like? And those type of things.
I'll have to remember to ask him that if I can ever get him on the podcast. I've talked to Deborah several times. I mean, because like I know Emery, but I'm not even going to try to schedule anything with Emery. I know if I can get it scheduled with Deborah, she'll make sure he's there.
Kind of, and I know they won't mind me sharing this, but we had this thing, kind of this process, like I was mentioning. We went out to the ranch and stayed the night, talked with Emery and Deborah, and kind of went through the, one end to the other end, and answered all the questions and got them thinking through and asking more questions, right? I mean, that's the thing. You don't know what you don't know till you start kind of unwoving this aspect. And so we got up the next morning, and Emery was just so chipper, and he's like, Chad, that was the best night's sleep I've had in 30 years. Because he said, I know I made the decision that we're going to move forward on this, and I don't have to worry about this ranch anymore. And the weight is off my shoulders. And that really said a lot to me, Brian, of someone I respect so much, from Emery, of kind of understanding that. And then you kind of really start thinking about that, in his mind, right? And they said, even if one of our children decides, hey, this isn't the right thing for them, and they want to sell the ranch in the future, at least this ranch is going to stay whole, and all the blood, sweat, and tears that those two put in that ranch, and the regenerative agriculture, and everything they've done, it's at least going to go to someone that's going to love the place as well, right? And do the same things. And it's going to, they have that assurance that Talt's going to help in that process of whoever runs that ranch in the future, if that's one of their children or someone else. And that was a big lift and weight off of both of them. And, we're just, I'm just happy to be able to help them in that, and that journey, and be partner with them, and make sure that we see, their wishes upheld forever.
Okay. Not sure where to go with this one, but I talk a lot about the triumvirate between management, ownership, and labor. That all three legs, whether it's triangular, it's a three-legged stool, a three-legged pot, whatever. All three legs have to be on mission, on vision, right? Everybody's got to be bought in and share that mission and vision of what the place is going to look like and how we're going to make it look like that. Okay. So that's ownership, and then that's management, and the actual execution on the ground comes down to the labor layer.
Yep.
Me being self-employed, I work for a total lunatic, but on the other hand, it's easy to get stuff done because ownership doesn't have to have a meeting with management, and then management doesn't have to have a meeting with labor. Like, I just talk myself into doing a stupid idea and I go do it. So adding in another entity like Texas Ag Land Trust into that decision-making process, I mean, I could see some red flags, but then also if management is very familiar with the conservation easement and has no trouble working within the bounds of it, then it should never be an issue.
Right. Yeah, I think, a couple of things, right? And it comes back to our guiding principles is, we're not going to dictate your management, or, so in some sense, we don't have to be part of your, we don't have to be a a four-legged stool in your process, or be part of one of your legs on the management side, right? And we can be, we're there to be a resource or to help. If we can be someone to kind of think through that process. The only reason that we would be in that decision if it was, a crazy idea of, plowing up this prairie and putting something else in, right? And kind of taking away those conservation values is the only reason. But if it was just, hey, I want to, change fence here, or I want to graze differently here, or I want to, do X from your operation that you're already doing, then we support you in that.
I want to build a cabin so I can Airbnb it out and share the beauty of the ranch with other people and make a few dollars on the side.
Yeah. So if that's your kind of crazy idea, then we would need to be in that discussion, and not saying you can't do that. It's just be able to say, oh, hey, from your conservation easement, what we put together, this is where you can build that cabin and do that.
This is where I'm thinking, well, this is where you can build it, and this is how much traffic is allowed down there, and this is how
Right.
the road can
Right.
be, and where you can put the road. And
Yep. And a lot of things, that's where we try to go through and work through that on the front end, right? As we're building that easement and that side. And I think it's building that partnership where we have that ability to have those dialogues to help one another. Yeah, we're not there to stop an idea, right? And that's a difference, right? And I think in the partnership is, we're not there to be a heavy-handed regulation of no matter what idea Brian comes to us, we're always going to say no and find a reason to say no. We're there to, yeah, this makes sense. How are we going to work through it to keep this to meet within the boundaries of that agreement?
more like it's not going to be an automatic no. It's going to be, well, let's figure out how to do this and stay within the bounds of your agreement.
Exactly, 100%.
I dig it.
Yeah.
I I've wanted to ask you for the last, I don't know, half hour. What are some of your red flags that you'd see in a conservation easement? But I guess you're the guy writing them, so you're the one putting the flags.
Right. Yeah, I think this is the things, right? That was a great question. I think,
Let's put it this way, okay? Maybe not specifically for Texas Ag Land Trust,
yeah,
but in a broader sense,
yeah,
what are some things that the listeners
right.
should throw up a red flag about when they hear conservation easement?
Yeah. No, so I think some of the couple of key things I would ask, right? If if I'm a landowner looking at a conservation easement, there's a few questions, and I'll kind of break it down. I think, Brian, is once you're working with that land trust, right, whoever it may be, some key questions that I would want to know. That to me is your first number one decision is who are you going to partner with, right? Because this dance is forever, right? And so you want to really make sure that and you said it well, right? That they see and understand what you're doing kind of through your lens and understand it. So that's a key one. And through that, I think one of the key questions is to understand what is the long-term sustainability of that as a business or an organization. Are they going to be around 5 years from now or 50 years from now? And some of those we don't know, but we can understand, the way they operate, from a business side, ask some of those key questions, right? Of just to give you assurance from that side. Understand who their board is, understand, some of that due diligence on your side. And once you feel comfortable and you're kind of made that decision, then it's understanding, some of the key pieces that we've talked about, through this conversation. Are they going to, am I going to be able to keep the freedom to operate? Are they going to get in the weeds of what I can and can't do? I think those are really key principles, that you need to understand. Um, those private property rights. What are those? What is that organization's guiding principles, right? And understanding from those key pieces.
Okay. I was sitting here wondering, okay, we started talking about conservation easement holders. And
Mhm.
so what happens if that entity that holds
Goes
the conservation easement, what happens if they go away? What happens if they dissolve? Is that easement does that function like a severed mineral right, and that's a saleable asset that they can sell then to somebody else to get out of bankruptcy or whatever problem they're having? On the other hand, it's hard to see an outfit like Todd or Nature Conservancy or some of these other ones that are out there offering conservation easements. It's hard to see a mechanism to where they would go away within a couple of months.
right. Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, one of the things, and we have it, and we're very clear on a couple of things in our language of TALT. And I'm going to talk from TALT because not everyone follows how we do it. So we have language in that conservation easement that say if we held the conservation easement on your place, Brian, and TALT, fell through from a business or, went away, um, that conservation easement could be transferred and we would work with you of helping you and you help make the decision of what other land trust it would go to. Okay, so you still have that ability sitting in your side of saying, no, I don't want A, but I really like B, right? And B is a better fit, and that would transfer there. This is one of the key pieces that I think is important, and we have business principles and things set up in our governance within the organization that there is a stewardship fee that everyone pays, which is a one-time fee that pays for us to monitor that easement forever.
Okay.
Okay. And that fee will stays with the land. So not only will that conservation easement move to another land trust in this situation, so will that stewardship fee.
Okay.
Right. So what happens, and unfortunately, we've seen it across the country. I can't think of anyone in Texas, but there's areas where a land trust financially starts, struggling, right, and keeping that nonprofit going, and then they start right moving into some of these other funds that they have, and then all of a sudden your stewardship dollars could be gone. Right. So I think those are some key questions when I say understand their business and their structure of the business is some of that side. We're very clear and have things where that helps you from a landowner and that investment is there in place. One of the other structures we have in place, Brian, is we have Texas Ag Land Trust, our nonprofit there, but we also hold a separate and entity, which is our foundation. And our foundation is out there, is developing an endowment. And that's one thing that we're working towards now is trying to build an endowment called the Forever Texas Fund and that foundation endowment that will then help be an operational fund back to TALT long term. So providing that extra security and assurance back to the landowner that we will be there financially there forever. Um, so those are some other things I think that are important to understand.
Okay. I I want to clarify something in the last couple minutes. You've used the phrase land trust, a land trust. You've said that several times, and there's nothing wrong with it. I just want to point out that there's a company named Land Trust,
Yeah.
and they don't have anything to do
Yep.
with conservation easements. They're just trying to connect hunters with private
Yep.
landowners. And I do work a little bit with Land Trust. They're
Yep.
a fantastic outfit, but I wanted to throw that out there for the listeners for a little bit of clarity.
No, you're exactly, yeah. And
It was also misrepresented on Cam Haines and Joe Rogan podcast a week or two ago. Cam Haines was talking about it, and he was mentioning he was talking about land trust using that phrase in some of the sort of same context.
yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Not picking on you, Chad. I'm not picking on you at all.
No, no. we all need to be clear for sure.
Okay.
Uh,
Carbon. What do you have?
yes.
I know I'll quit tripping on my words one of these days. Um, Carbon contracts. I know there's a bunch of different carbon companies. I'm working with Grassroots.
Yep.
So real quick, I know you've been around for a long time, and I know you and I have had many in-depth conversations in hallways at conferences about soil carbon and ecosystem goods and services. I guess without really calling out any companies, what would you look for in a carbon contract, and what would you run away from in a carbon contract?
Yeah. No, that's a great. So one of the pieces at Talt, Brian, it's kind of like I said, our business model is around conservation easements, but it's also this side, right, of ecosystem service markets and building what I kind of call like additive conservation, right? How do we keep adding value and stacking that value? And so one of the things that we wanted to really be is a trusted hub in this area. And so, we have these conversations with landowners call us that may not be interested in a conservation easement, just interested in a carbon, contract. And us sort of as a nonprofit, we have no skin in the game, right? I mean, we're just here to help and kind of ask those questions. And so one of the things that we put together, and unfortunately, what we see is when the opportunities arise, a lot of times we see bad actors, right, that jump into it, that see it for a quick buck, that aren't in it to think of, Brian Alexander or Chad Ellis as producers and helping us, and they're in it for all the wrong reasons. And so one of the things we put together with the group of partners here in Texas was a 101 carbon kind of publication, Soil Carbon 101, like determining if soil carbon storage markets are right for you. And this key publication, we had some producers like the Grazing Land Coalition here in Texas. We had some lawyers sitting in the room as well, right? To kind of what are key areas and what are key questions, because you don't know what you don't know. And so those are the things of kind of around commitment, compensation, costs, measurement, restrictions, and legal considerations, right? So it's kind of some key things. I always kind of push people to those. There's some other new, I would say, publications out there now too that help. The King Ranch Institute's put out a really good one, if you've seen that one as well. But I think when we start going down those contracts, Brian, I think one is I always provide people that we always want to shy away from legal counsel and things of that nature just because of the cost. But if we're getting into these contracts, you want to have that legal side, right, to make sure, just as you would a oil and gas, right, severed right. You're not going to do that and negotiate those on your own without legal advice, and this is the same. Try to break down those key pieces, and I got a lot of pet peeves, so I don't know where to start, Brian. I think depending on that contract, right, and they're all different, and every group's different in the way they're structured. If I don't reach that modeled number of amount of carbon in the ground by whatever year, who's liable for that? Do I have to pay back, or is that on the developer? Some of those are key, right? Because no matter how good a land steward I am and the practices and things I'm doing and moving forward, if we're in the worst 5-year drought, on history, are we going to reach those goals, right? And so I think those are some key things. I think the cost, who's responsible for those costs and those measurement costs, verification, are really key ones. Understand those restrictions too, Brian. I think Can I sell or lease lands that are enrolled? If I sell the land, does that transfer over to the next, owner, or do I have to pay back? What are those things? I mean, we can go through a long laundry list of pieces, and I'm going to get down to probably the thing that I feel is my biggest pet peeve, and where I've seen some, I'd say fellow friends, right, get hurt, and they sign a contract, and the contract set up that you don't own your data anymore, right? Your data is transferred to whoever the contract's under. And some of those contracts I've seen, Brian, that developer then owns your data and then owns any future other ecosystem service markets that may arise, and you aren't eligible for those.
Ooh.
Right? Those are bad. That's not what you want, right? And those were, and again, I think we've done enough pushback that those probably aren't out there as much anymore, or I haven't seen as many. But I would say a few years ago, I saw quite a few of those that were something that you just don't understand, or the landowner didn't fully understand. They didn't get that legal advice to understand. And I really say that on anything, right, of these markets or anything else, be very careful on the data, right? You should always own your data. You have the rights to your data. You should negotiate that, if that company uses your data for other widgets or other things that they may build, because a lot of these companies are kind of twofold, right? They're maybe technology companies, and then also providing a carbon market, that if they build another widget over here on the other side of the business, you should still get your fair share because your data helped develop that. And so things of that nature to really be strong towards, and understand. I really feel that the data is another stackable money stream to producers. Kind of come back to our early part of our conversation of farming side and the cropping side. There's been a lot of data, a lot of collection and things like on that side forever, and it's more ingrained. And with that, there's more data available for scientists to develop models and other things, right? But when we kind of come back to our grazing side of the scenario, as we talked about, right, we've sort of been this redheaded stepchild, and we don't have some of these things. That data is not as rich. But so for a company building something that maybe benefit you and I as operators, those tools, which is fine, but we should negotiate and understand a win-win situation, and understand, and not being taken advantage of, and taking someone taking that data and us not getting anything back for it.
All great points. All great points. No, I really don't have anything else, Chad. You got anything?
Well,
you got anything you want to ask me?
Yeah, no, I would love to know kind of, um, where do you see your operation in the next few years?
Oh, you would ask that question today. So I guess I'll go ahead and break the news here and tell everybody what's on my mind. I'm looking at an opportunity in about 90 days to pretty much get out of my cows. I'm probably going to be selling off almost all of my cows in the next 90 to 120 days and moving back towards a custom grazing operation. Not giving up on beef business. I'm partnering with a neighbor, been running cattle with them together for 2 years. Nothing's official yet. We've just talked about it. I think he's going to end up buying some of my younger stock and some of my calves to put in his beef program. And as we go forward, I may retain ownership in some of those. But the goal is I'll be doing most of the work in the operation in the summer, grazing a lot of his cows and some of mine all summer, and then the winter we're going to destock the ranch and send them all down to his place because he's got several thousand acres of old tillage, of old farm ground, old wheat pasture, wheat ground, that he's turning back into grass. So what? It's a lot easier to feed down there in the winter. A lot easier to keep animals alive down there in the winter.
Yeah.
So that's what we're moving towards. And I'm not giving up on anything. I'm just making a pivot because cooperation is a lot better than competition.
Yeah. No, I actually look at it, Brian. You're just looking at it from that systems approach, right? And your land is being part of the system of your neighbors, and to the reasons you're saying, right? It's just a different the cooperation, is kind of that part of that system.
I mean, if I had the ranch north of me,
Yeah.
with a lot more bottom ground,
Yeah.
it'd be a different story.
Sure.
But the kind of grass that I grow on the ranch, the kind of terrain that I have, it's just awful thin eating for cows in the winter.
Right.
It's real thin eating, and I didn't lose any last winter, didn't lose any the winter before, but man, it's awful rough watching them get hungry there in late April and May before the grass shows up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to adjust strategy a little bit and still kind of continue on the same basic path of trying to help build those smaller frame, more efficient, more fertile animals that can get by on less.
Awesome. One last question I have for you, and just kind of all your conversations and your thoughts, is maybe a question and a conversation beyond carbon, right? Is start thinking of, from maybe a biodiversity, right? And your thoughts around a biodiversity credit and what that would mean for you as an operator. What does that really mean? How would that need to be developed to make sense for you?
You're not the first person that's wanted to have a conversation with me about biodiversity credits. You're just the first one that's wanted to do it while the record button's been pushed. I probably feel like biodiversity credits like everybody thought about carbon credits 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Like you're smoke and mirrors. But on the other hand, they've solved a lot of challenges in regard to carbon measuring and carbon monitoring. I mean,
Yeah.
we still got to go out and take a 3-foot soil core to see what's really down there. So the question becomes, how do you measure? And then how do you compare that against an index? You measure what's here versus what should be here or what could be here. Or do we take an average of the neighbors and index that against what you have? So then it becomes a question of, okay, are we going to be looking for biomass? Are we going to be looking for different species and their total biomass broken down by species? And okay, the quote comes to mind: there's no use hitting bullseyes if you're aiming at the wrong target.
Right.
What's the target? Like, that's the question, is what is the target?
No. Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think, I guess I go back to this is that I think there's opportunities, right? And beyond carbon of other ecosystem service of goods, that we're providing as ranchers in the future. And I think, but it all needs to be done correctly, right? To your point of having the right target, the right things. I think technology is coming to cheapen up, right? When we think of a transaction of those costs, and being able to measure and monitor are getting much easier and quicker than us having to go out there manually and do everything, or at least lower that amount. I don't know. I'm excited about the potential. And where I really think is this biodiversity helps us maybe overall of kind of even our conversation is understanding as a society as a whole of this private land stewardship, public benefits. I take Texas, for example. You take far east Texas of maybe Nacogdoches, Brian, where 60-inch rainfall, right? It has high potential for carbon. And then you take something out and out towards Ozona, far west, in West Texas with maybe 15-inch rainfall, and those soils, right? It has less potential, and it's from the DNA of the ranch, of the soils and the climate and everything. But we look at it from a biodiversity. I mean, it's a very, very important ecosystem for lots of wildlife and pollinators and things of that nature, more so than maybe far east Texas. And so then that gives us opportunities of all of our land managers, of opportunities that how can we stack these opportunities with them. And to me, when we get to that point, that's when it starts making sense and incentivizing. It's kind of like they say, conservation without compensation is only a conversation, right?
Ooh, I like that.
In some sense, I always say that, and then I always say that historically it's been actually exploitation, right? And instead of a conversation, because we're doing all these goods and benefits as ranchers and farmers and land stewards, and providing that and being exploited, right, and not being paid for those. And so I think in the future, I'm hoping to see that not that we have to get paid for everything, but it'd be nice, to get paid for some of that land stewardship and be able to invest back in to more conservation and more things in our operations as a whole. And I'm excited about what the future has in store with this. But I think it's at the same time we're going to need good minds like yourself and others at the table, and producers at the table, to kind of help drive what these systems need to be.
Okay. I'm I'm hung up on biodiversity credits and how to measure it.
Yeah.
And do we look at keystone species? Okay. So beaver? Sure. Well, what are you going to get when your creeks and rivers are totally infested with beaver? Will you get river otters back? Is that the next level? What's the next level past a river otter? And then grassland birds are another one. Okay. You've got, your sparrows, your dickcissels, your small birds that eat bugs and grasshoppers. And then kind of moving up the chain, you've got quail, which, everybody loves to go hunt. They're even kind of delicious to eat.
Yeah.
You've got to have some pretty good habitat. You've got to have good habitat before you're going to have quail on the ranch, right?
Umbrella species, yeah.
So then the next one that you get after quail is going to be prairie chicken. In my case, lessers.
Right.
Okay. But that's not the end of it. Because if you have enough lessers, kit foxes will show up. Okay. So what's after that? I don't know. I mean,
right. No, I mean,
I got to the beaver phase and the kit fox phase, and that's where I'm at.
No, I think, this is the point, right? And it comes back to our very beginning is, sometimes we make ecological process is messy, right? And it's complicated. And this being part of that, right, of the conversation. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. And, I think the index is the right way. I mean, the getting into the details of how you develop this biodiversity index is the question, right? And where you're in. And I don't know.
Figuring out how to index it.
Yep.
And then measuring it at a cost-effective manner.
Yep.
Where the cost of measurement doesn't eat up the revenue generated by the credit. Like, that's where we were for carbon for a long time. Like when voluntary carbon credits were, $4, $5, $8, nobody gets interested, but man, all of a sudden they get up to 20.
Yeah, starts making sense.
And now we can start making some financial sense to pay the measurement cost out of that and still have money left over to pay landowners. Like, now we're getting somewhere. I mean, if carbon price actually got where carbon price is going high. Like I think most of the companies out there right now are offering around $20 a ton.
Right.
If they're quoting a ton, if not, if your carbon company that wants a carbon contract is quoting you a per acre payment, leave.
Yeah.
Like, go to somebody that will quote you a per ton payment.
Right.
And I think right now they're all kind of like in the $20 a ton range. I think I've seen 22 and I've seen 17 on the bottom end. We're talking about per acre per year here. I mean, we're talking about $5. $5 is a lot of money when you talk about.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And if carbon price goes up, and this is why I say it's a carbon gold rush. Okay. In the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a section 45Q. Like, everybody go look this up. 45Q section of the Inflation Reduction Act. It lays out tax credits for carbon capture. The top end caps at $145 a ton tax credit for carbon capture. And granted, this is a mechanical capture scheme injecting it into rocks 5,000 feet down. That's the floor. $145 a ton is what companies get a write off.
Right.
So that price that we're being offered for $20 of soil carbon, will it be 145? Yeah, probably not. Will it be somewhere between 20 and 145? I hope so.
Sure.
I mean, I'd be happy with 40. I'd be happy with $40 a ton. That would make my day. That would make my whole year, in fact.
No, I mean that's the point, right? We got to find these incentives to help, right? Be in the black instead of the red, and start helping us in getting that. And I'm more excited today. We're not there, but it's definitely the first time I've ever felt that we're stepping in the right direction to what you're saying. And we just gotta keep pushing. And I think the key to this, right, is what I always say is we need usable science, right, which is the end user part of the process, and that's us as producers need to be in those rooms and helping understand, move the needle in these markets too. Because a lot of times I think some of the failures is really good ideas, but they didn't have us in the room to understand, right? And then these good ideas got to you trying to implement on the ranch, and it was just like, this doesn't work. And these are, the 5 obvious reasons why it doesn't work. And they're like, what? I didn't know. And so that's the thing, right? And it comes back to you said it earlier of cooperation and collaboration and things of that nature for us to find these solutions.
Yep. Well, good stuff, Chad.
Hey, man, I appreciate catching up with you, and thanks so much for just sitting down and talking through some of this together.
It just occurred to me. I know we're making progress in ag. I know we're moving the right way. And I know that because I've known you for 15 years. And every conversation we have is about the future. You and I have not had the same conversation about what's wrong more than once. That's one thing I really like about you is you're one of the guys in the industry that's always trying to move things forward and not stuck in the past. And I've always appreciated that about you, Chad.
I appreciate that, man. And that's what I think, that's what I wake up each and every day, is how do we keep moving it forward? So appreciate all you do as well. So thanks again.
All right. Great stuff. And gang, that's it. Enjoy your week. See ya. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review if you haven't already. And don't forget to check out the Q&A and the polls on Spotify. Your support helps us bring more enlightening conversations and fresh stories from the world of farming and ranching. Thank you for listening to Ranching Reboot, your favorite regenerative ag podcast.